Hello, welcome to Criterion's presentation on measuring performance in nonprofit organizations. I'm Steve Kuhn, Chief Sales Officer with Criterion. We're a leading publisher of human capital management or HCM software for nonprofits. Joining me is Beverly Thompson of Carter Global. And Beverly, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Steve. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm Managing Director of Carter Global. We're an international fundraising consulting firm. I think we're in 15 countries now. We have over 41 consultants worldwide, and we work in every vertical of fundraising, whether that's education, religion, sports, human services, all across the board. So I'm delighted to be here with you and excited to get deep into the work.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Really happy to have you with us. If you'd like to get in touch with Beverly and Carter Global, there's going to be her contact information at the end of this presentation so that you can quick jot it down or take a screenshot or whatever you need to do. Today's conversation is being recorded, and you can request a link to the recording after the presentation. And we want to invite you to participate in the conversation as well. But during our initial part of the conversation, please use the chat feature to submit questions that you have, and we will answer as many as possible at the end. I would also urge you to do that kind of like in the moment, because I think if you wait to the end, you may forget exactly what you were trying to get, the point you were trying to get across. So it's always a little bit greater value if you quickly jot down the question and shoot it into the chat. So here's our agenda for today. I'm just going to give you a minute to just kind of briefly review that before we get started. And we're going to take each one of these 4 items and dig a little bit deeper into them as we go through. Okay, so this may seem like an obvious question to a lot of folks that are already on this call, but Beverly, can you just share, your view on what sets nonprofits apart from, private business organizations?
Sure. Well, besides the obvious, which is the IRS designation between corporations and nonprofits, there are all different types of nonprofit organizations, but I think that the biggest issue or the biggest differentiator is corporations really are in the business to be in business. They have a return on investment agreement either with whoever owns the organization or the shareholders, that sort of thing. Now, nonprofits are a little bit different. They're really set up by the government as the public trust. So what is the change that you are trying to solve in the world is what we ask nonprofits very frequently. And that really goes to the heart of the message. What change do they want to see? What problem are they trying to solve? And the U.S. government gives us some tax opportunities to make sure that people can invest in those a little bit different. So as opposed to a return on investment, I like to say that nonprofits are mostly concerned with the return on impact. How are they making an impact towards the change that they want to see in the world? And you can do that in a variety of ways. A lot of those include fundraising. And since I usually have the lens of fundraising with the work that we do at Carter, I'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. But really, the biggest difference across the board is that return on investment versus return on impact. And that doesn't mean that corporations can't have an impact, but we measure those a little bit differently, especially in regards to what I would, again, consider the public trust. So that public trust sometimes goes back to the people that you serve. We hope. Sometimes that goes to the donors who invest in the nonprofit organization for the change that they want to see and the mission alignment that they value. But what is the promise and what is your ability to keep that promise is how I define the nonprofit world.
Okay. I should point out here too, and maybe you can give a little bit of insight here too, you have an HR background.
I do. It's a little bit dated, but my undergraduate degree is in human resource management. I have a PhD in human resource and leadership development, which is not the management side, but the organizational development side of the universe. And I feel like I put that degree to use every single day, whether it's working for a for-profit corporation, working with a board of directors, or it's working with a nonprofit organization, helping them make their people or their processes faster or stronger to serve the world. So I do have an HR background.
We're going to tap into that.
All right.
All right. So because the next real question I want to get out to you is, let's define metrics, those things that, that are measurable, quantitative, things that you can look at for your people in an organization, and especially in a nonprofit organization, as an for the people. How do you define these things? How can you identify these things?
Such a great question. I started out my career actually as a recruiter for a regional bank. And when I recruited talent for a bank all the way to running a hospital foundation, I've had multiple iterations in my career. So speaking as a recruiter, recruiting for organizations, for other management positions, for other people to manage, as well as running my own organization. And I would even say at Carter is we work with organizations that are strategically trying to identify either the CEOs or executive directors of the nonprofit organizations to the people who are doing the boots on the ground work of serving those organizations to fundraising. I don't think it's much different. I think when you hire people, you want to make sure first and foremost that people are mission aligned with you and values aligned. I think that is exponentially more important and has a much greater force in nonprofits. Because if someone is not mission aligned and doesn't want to serve the people that you're serving and or help solve the problem that you're trying to solve, they're probably not going to be a great fit, regardless of how talented they are. So if someone's not mission aligned and they're a social worker, that's going to be a problem if you're working with your people. If somebody is not mission aligned and they are on your fundraising or development team, working every day towards metrics and goals is not going to be as exciting unless you really believe in the cause and the work that you're doing every day. So I tell people frequently when they say what's the difference between somebody who is in a corporation versus a nonprofit doing the work, and it's really what motivates that person. Generally, folks in nonprofits are very, very goal-oriented people. They like metrics. I say pretty frequently in my own work, I like to get A pluses. I just want to know how to get those A pluses. So what that typically looks like is what it looks like in a major corporation as well. What are the expectations of my position? How am I going to be successful? How am I going to be rewarded for that success? And how am I going to be measured? Now, I'm going to put a fundraising lens on this since we're talking nonprofits. I'm going to presume that a lot of people on the call are hiring folks that are part of the mission advancement of the organization. And when I say that, I mean that they are part of the fundraising team, they're part of the development team, they're part of the folks that are going out and asking others to invest in the organization. And I would say, we can put metrics around those people that aren't necessarily dollars raised, although dollars raised is very important for a fundraiser. And that's part of the A pluses that we like. It's if I need to raise $1 million in my yearly metrics, that's great. For ethical reasons, we typically don't put bonuses around those things, but I want to know what those numbers are and I want to know how to get there. How do you typically get there and how do you measure that? Well, I believe if you do the work, then the money will come. It won't always come on your timeline. It's not like sales, but the process in many ways is very similar. How many visits are you having? Did you visit with identified people? Did you visit with donors who are qualified? You're not just visiting to visit, for example. Are you cultivating those folks in meaningful, tactful ways? Are you making asks of those folks? Are you putting proposals on the table? So number of proposals given in a year can be one of the metrics. And how are you stewarding those donors and fundraising in the pipeline of the donor continuum, if you will, from identification to gift made and stewardship? The reality is we don't want to be transactional. We want to be in relationship with folks for a very long period of time. So where are they, the donor, in that stage? How do we measure those stages? How many people in that pipeline do we have in particular stages? And are we getting them from one stage to the next? Not just on the organizational timeline, but on the donor's timeline. And to know what a donor's timeline is, we have to be in relationship with them. So visit. I frequently have conversations with boards and boards of directors, and they always want to wrap bonuses around money. If the money doesn't come in, then we want to pay somebody a bonus, or we don't want to pay them until they hit certain markers. And metrics, if you do the work and you put the benchmarks around those metrics and around those stages and visits, then the money will come. And sometimes it comes bigger than you expected. But if you measure the visits, some years are really great and some years might be a little bit lower or higher because somebody surprises you. But again, just like anything else, mission alignment, set the goals, measure those goals, and watch for success. So folks that are in nonprofits sometimes get a bad rap, Steve, I find. People think, oh gosh, they're not as motivated. Absolutely not my experience. The most motivated people I've ever met and the most heart-aligned people I've ever met work at nonprofit organizations. And they are just as motivated as those investment bankers. They're just not necessarily motivated by money. They are motivated by wins, just like in corporate America. So I hope that answers your question. Is that your experience?
It does. And I'll have to take exception though, because it does sound in a lot of cases like sales. When you're talking about fundraising and keeping alignment with your goals and building relationships, it certainly is the same things we strive for as a sales organization as well. But I get the point.
Yeah, the process is very similar. It's just people are investing in organizations because they're mission aligned, not because they get something in return. The return is much more altruistic, if you will, from a donor perspective. I would suggest that if you are very mission aligned and you work really hard to stay in relationship with people, those relationships stay for a long period of time. And it's not much different than folks that are in high volume sales organizations or I would suggest business to business relationship organizations.
Sure. So you've got these, you've got talent in your organization. And it seems like in a lot of organizations, private or not, in nonprofit or private practice, is that, so many times your top performer, is like, they must be the right manager, or, how do you help people figure that conundrum out, that your best coach is not necessarily your best player?
That's a great question. I spent a lot of time growing up. My father was in professional sports, so on baseball fields, and I always go back to baseball analogies. it's very rare that you have somebody that can run really fast, that can hit really hard, and can field the ball. But generally, you're good at 2 out of 3. Well, I don't think that's much different in the world of work. You have very frequently, and we find this a lot in fundraising, and we find this a lot in just across just about any field, somebody who's really, really great at the work and is hitting their metrics and knocking down goals might be really great at that particular role, but managing people is not really their forte. In fact, one of the best bosses I ever had said, my job is to give you all the tools to do your job, eliminate any obstacles, and then get out of your way. Really get out of your way. And that was just such a gift as a manager, especially in professions where you've got highly talented, highly motivated people. Give them the tools that they need for their job, eliminate their obstacles, and let them do their work. Now, I had lunch with her recently, and I asked her, I said, what are you doing now that you're retired? And she said, I can tell you what I'm not doing. I'm not managing people. And this is one of the best bosses I ever had. And she was brilliant at managing people. But managing people is actually a really, really unique skill set. Making sure that people are motivated, making sure that not just the motivators for the organization, but for that individual person are in place, and really managers understanding how to cultivate and grow talent is really important. And that's a very different skill set. And again, I'm going to put a fundraising lens on this. Very frequently, we're asked why somebody who's a really, really great annual giving person, really good at making the calls, having the conversations, isn't really performing, say, over here in major gifts. Well, one is very transactional, one is very relationship based. You have to understand the skill set. And so are we motivating and growing people within their particular skill set in a way that makes a difference? Now, very frequently, those same people, if they're really great at their job, they get put in charge of people. And the same things that motivate them to be highly successful as fundraisers, being out of the office, having conversations with people, being in a relationship, being motivated by dollars. When you're managing a group of people who are doing that, your job is to manage those people. You are not out there having relationships, talking about the organization all day, every day, inspiring donors. It's a very different skill set. So be watchful, be careful, be understanding. And when people are excellent within an organization, in their skill set, whether it's that annual fund director, for example, do you have metrics and growth plans in place for them to stay where they are and feel like they're growing wide, i.e. they're getting more professional development, they're growing in their skill set, and or to grow up in an organization in a way that makes sense for them and the organization. So not everybody needs to grow up into management. Can they grow up into being senior and the best at what they do, and maybe training some other people, but not managing other people? Very frequently we find when you move people, your numbers go down. That doesn't mean they're good teachers. That doesn't mean that they're good motivators. That means they're really great at doing this role. Can you expand that role and motivate them and grow them up in ways and reward them financially and or with other opportunities that are meaningful for them? Long answer, short question.
Not a problem.
I love consulting. I'm a great example of that. I love consulting. I have all of the authority and none of the responsibility. I don't love managing people. So when we put teams together where I'm a motivator, I'm a leader, I get in front of folks, but there's somebody else doing the action plan, managing the team. So that's not so different when you're in different organizations. If you don't love managing people in this role, you're probably not going to love managing people in that role.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, so let's take the next step in this scenario. So you have a gap, all right? You need to bring somebody in, okay? So first of all, to kind of take it maybe in a two-part question here is really how do you go out and find these people? And then once you've made that offer, they come on board, how do you keep them there?
So those are two very different questions. So how do you recruit top talent? I right this second, that's the golden ticket answer, isn't it?
Yeah.
I believe that recruiting top talent still goes to those traditional based places that professional organizations are the number one way to find and recruit talent. So for example, my personal professional organizations are the Association of Fundraising Professionals and CFRE. One is a certifying organization and the other is a professional development organization. If I am going to post a position to get somebody who looks, walks, talks with the certifications that I need and or going through the ranks of professional development, I'm going to go to those two organizations because they figured it out. And the other reason I'm going to go to those is because I've got to eliminate the noise. I've got to get through the hundreds of thousands of people looking and go to the folks who are investing in their professional development, that are participating in professional organizations in ways that are meaningful to them. Now, across the board, regardless, I have not ever found this to be untrue. So if you're looking for an HR person, you're going to go to the Society of Human Resource Management or the Association of Training and Development. Period. They've done the certifications, they're doing the professional development. That is not different in engineering. That is not different if you are in the museum space. That is not different if you are a biochemist, those professional associations. The other thing that I think from a recruitment perspective is extremely important is LinkedIn. I'm not a huge fan of some of the other great big recruiting organizations, although I'm sure they're great, but it produces more noise. But LinkedIn is a great way to post positions and get networks and get highly targeted and specific in particular regions. I'm also a big fan of chambers of commerce. Chambers of commerce and departments of economic development within particular states do a terrific job of posting positions. And right this second, organizations that are over a certain size, corporations and nonprofits for that matter, are posting positions with their offices of workforce development and offices of economic development because of the situation that we find ourselves in post-pandemic. So if somebody is finding themselves unemployed or they're being career changing, those are fantastic places to post. And by law, many of those organizations have to post positions there. So folks are looking there. It would behoove organizations, nonprofit or for-profit, to post in those. The other reason I like LinkedIn is you ask your networks to share, and generally people are connected to people that they have worked with and for that do the work and are mission aligned with the work that they do. So that's my long answer on recruitment. It's nothing magical. I will tell you that I do have 2 millennials and 2 Generation Z folks in my family that are currently going into the job market. So they're highly motivated young professionals that are coming out of the workforce, and it's been fascinating to watch how they are looking at the universe and where they are looking. Old school career services offices in universities for both undergraduates and graduates and their alumni are still terrific places to look and terrific places to post, because we go back to what we know. Now, retaining talent, I'm going to take a sip of water because that's a whole different ballgame, don't you think?
That's fine, because I got to thinking about this, and we got another slide coming up, and it's part of that recruiting process too. but it's the articulation of, the organization. How do you get that value across to people who are looking, but then also the people who are there that may have lost sight of what the vision is, right? So
Absolutely. And Steve, I believe this to be true anecdotally. I've seen research on it. I can't cite any. And as an academic, I'm curious what your thoughts are on this. But just like we look at being in relationship with folks in the nonprofit world and in the fundraising business, I feel as if anecdotally, it is still true that the number one reason that people leave an organization is because of the person they report to. Not necessarily that they're not mission aligned with the organization, but they generally cite reasons. And I always say, if you can't grow up, like if somebody is motivated to grow up in an organization, and not everybody, by the way, is motivated to grow up in an organization, right? That career path, they may be perfectly happy where they are. And that's awesome. Are we meeting them where they are by growing them wide? Are we giving them professional development opportunities? Are they still mission aligned with the organization? Are we checking in with them, both personally and professionally, about what their personal goals are and what they would like to see next in the organization? When they offer feedback, are we listening to that feedback? Are we giving responses to that feedback? So how are our managers doing in stewarding that mission and vision for the organization? And are we keeping the promise of what we said we were going to do when we hired these folks? I talk to people all the time, and particularly in nonprofit organizations and bigger organizations that use services like yours do a whole lot better job of this. But it's not unusual to talk to even executive directors and CEOs of organizations who haven't had a review in years. They haven't had a check-in with either their board of directors, because CEOs or executive directors are reporting to the board, in years. So from a nonprofit perspective, starting at the very top, is the board evaluating themselves? Do they have a board matrix? Is the board mission aligned with who they are as a person and what they want to do? And are they evaluating themselves as a board? And are they really taking seriously the professional development of either that executive director, president, CEO, whatever that top level title is? Because that is their role, to make sure that they manage only that person. But are they giving that person professional development? Are they giving them feedback on how they're doing? Are they putting metrics in place and goals in place? And not just strategic planning, but executive compensation. Do you have an executive compensation policy in your organization? And are you following that? Have you looked at your bylaws lately? That trickles all the way down. So what is our senior level management doing? How are they doing in evaluating their people? Are they doing check-ins? I'm a firm, huge believer, and this absolutely goes back to my HR days. If somebody is not performing in your organization and you have gotten to the point where you need to release them and they are surprised, shame on you. You have not done your job as an organization or as a manager, providing proper feedback, setting mission, values, goals, making sure that that is in a line on a yearly basis, making sure that they have the tools that they need to do their job. And if they don't, that you're offering alternatives if possible. So people will stick with an organization, particularly mission-aligned organizations, if they feel as if they're heard, if they feel as if they have the opportunity to not just grow tall, growing tall if they want to, being promoted and having a career path, knowing what that trajectory is, but also growing wide. Are you getting them their certifications? If you have the opportunity for education, is that there? Are you able to give them some of those benefits of travel or the wellness things, all of those are important, but are they important to the people that work with you and for you? And do you know? It's very important for managers to check in on those things.
Oh, okay. Well, great. Hey,
It is for me.
I was remiss. I'm too much engaged in this, and I just was like going like, oh, this is what we should have been talking on this slide right here. And but I think to kind of to push back. Obviously, it's very important that leadership is involved in building that effective team from the board down. And then making sure that that message, that this is our goal, this is our mantra, this is what we do, why we do it, is shared with everyone on a consistent basis, so that people are always connecting with what the organization does.
Absolutely.
So
And did you survey the person that you hired and ask them what was the decision maker, what was important to them in that decision making? And are you checking with them year after year to see how you're doing on that value proposition that you offered upon their hire?
So part of this, you have your mission, but some of this mission is all around, being self-supportive and being funded and so forth. So there is money involved, but how do you evaluate, that nonprofit's impact, without that dollar stigma, if you will, attached to it?
Well, how you evaluate a nonprofit is probably not much different than how you evaluate a for-profit organization. However, we don't necessarily do it in just how much money came in the door and what did our shareholders get. Instead of that return on investment, what is a return on impact? And we say that a lot, but I do think it goes to evaluating across from the top down, and it goes to, is the board aligned with the mission, vision, strategic direction? Are you recruiting board members that really have a heart for your mission first? And then are they hitting all of those other demographics that you potentially need to do the work that you do? Is your leadership team being evaluated, and are they looking at that mission alignment? And I think that actually does go towards what we're talking about here with measuring the nonprofit. Now, those are things that perhaps you might not ever see in an annual report. However, if the leadership is not mission aligned, you can be certain that sooner or later that organization is going to come off the rails, no matter how much money that they're raising, how much impact they're having. That organization is going to come out of alignment in some way, shape, or form if that leadership is not aligned with the heart of the mission. Now, that being said, there are amazing organizations like Candid and GuideStar and the Foundation Center who do a really good job of putting certifications and badges and things like that to see how an organization is doing. But I do think the media has portrayed nonprofits in a really negative way with a very singular measure. And that singular measure that we hear a lot, that I want to dispel the rumor, and I'm probably preaching to the choir given who's on the call here, but here's your shout out, is how much money did we raise versus how much money went actually to what we're saying that we're doing. And we hear a lot about overhead projections and things like that. Well, working, for example, with the organization that's in human services, that let's say they're raising $5 million a year, and their overhead, and I'm going to air quote overhead, is $4.8 million, and they're serving children with special needs. Well, The overhead is physical therapists and occupational therapists and ABA specialists and folks who are doing the work to serve and provide services to children with special needs. So the measure of how much money gets paid in overhead to an organization is really dependent on the organization. So a blank rubber stamp on, what's the overhead of an organization? Let's look at their 990. How much money did they raise and how much money went to salaries, for example, is a terrible measure if you're in the medical space or if you're in a space with huge human capital like education, where the brain trust of your teachers and professors is where the money is. So dollars raised versus overhead is a terrible metrics. What are they doing? So what I'd really like to see is, how many kids had an occupational therapy appointment and how many kids who come from underserved populations who wouldn't have the ability to pay for that got served by your organization, for example. So it goes down to what is that mission of your organization and literally what are you telling in your bylaws, your articles of incorporation and bylaws about the work that you do? What is the public trust of the problem that you're trying to solve? And what are the numbers around the problem that you're trying to solve? So, for example, I used to work for a hospital foundation and we raised money and gave it to the hospital in order for them to do the work. Well, how many cancer patients got a free mammogram of women who couldn't afford it? How many sexual assault victims were able to be provided clothes and had screenings and therapy that they needed? How many babies in the NICU were able to get human donor breast milk and had a life projection that was better because of the work that we did? How many how many people did you serve based on the mission, vision, values, and what we call in nonprofits of the case for support? What is the problem that you're trying to solve that private philanthropy could help you solve in a much more meaningful way? Put numbers around those. What are you doing? What is the actual work that you're doing? And what is the impact and the return on that? I want to hear donor stories. I want to hear stories from the populations that you serve. And I want to hear from that physical therapist doing the work and the highlight moments that they had. So you can tell stories in 100 different ways, and it's not just about the money. It's about what that money does to serve the people that you're trying to serve and the public trust that you're entrusted with as a nonprofit.
Very good, very good. And I think that kind of leads into this last component here is, since you've got your background and experience working, in the nonprofits, what are some of those cultures? I know you mentioned a couple organizations earlier on, and I kind of lost. I'm sorry, I didn't make a note, but that they do badges and they do recognitions and things like that. What are some of those things that you found that have they're maybe minor things, but they make a big impact to the people?
That's a great question. One of the things, particularly in smaller and mid-level nonprofits that we find is that, particularly in fundraising. So again, I'm going to put the lens over on the fundraising piece, but just like human resource management 30 years ago when I said that out loud. 30 years ago, when I was coming out of college, they used to call it personnel, and that they were just wrapping their hands around, the public was just wrapping their hands around, gosh, this is an actual profession. This is a profession that you can be a specialist in, whether that's compensation or whether that's payroll or whether that's employee engagement, all the different facets. And we thought it was a fantastic idea to start putting professional development certifications around that. And now PHR and SPHR are some of the most recognized credentials in the country. Well, that's not much different in nonprofit organizations. So for example, I am a CFRE, that is a certified fundraising executive. And with all due respect, it does sometimes fundraising sound like sales. It is not sales. So there's just like everybody back in the day said, he can be in personnel, let's put the boss's kid over here in personnel. Somebody's got to do it this week. We as a profession and the world of nonprofits have really done a tremendous amount of due diligence to make sure that people are highly skilled and professional and within their chosen field. So the Association of Fundraising Professionals, you have the Council for Advancement in Education, which is CASE. You've got AHP. All of those organizations do professional development, and they have certifications around the particular areas. So I would say if you're hiring somebody in a nonprofit organization, you're hiring somebody, for example, to be a CFO and to do cost accounting, you probably are going to go with somebody who has credentials in that field. You're absolutely going to go hire the CPA. If you're hiring somebody in HR, you're absolutely going to look first for the person with the PHR, the SPHR. If you're hiring a social worker, same credentialing. Well, it's not any different in the nonprofit space. The CFRE is a highly valued and important credential in our field, and it says that we are experts in these particular areas. Now, you can be a specialist in a particular area, but hiring people that are credentialed in the work that they do, again, back to those professional organizations, I think are really important. So high-performing nonprofits don't, forgive the way I'm going to say this, dumb down their staffing. They don't say, gosh, well, this person has this, so we'll just put them over here in fundraising. We find very frequently that people think marketing is fundraising, or they think communications is fundraising. And although they are adjacent and although they are important, they are very different in many cases, skill sets. So are you hiring people that are credentialed to do the work in the work that you need them to do? So that being said, absolutely lots of career changers in any one of those fields. And do people have, again, that mission for the organization? Do they have transferable skills, and or are they willing to get credentialed and move towards that? So if you are hiring somebody, say, for example, and by the way, school teachers make amazing degree transfers, career transfers over into fundraising, we find. If somebody is transferring their degree. Why? Because they know how to write a plan, they know how to work a plan, they know how to adjust the plan based on who they're sitting in front of. So I'm not saying don't hire a career changer. What I am saying is if you hire a career changer, put the credential of the person that you would have hired in front of them and say, I am willing to invest to make sure that you have this professional development in these areas. And here are some of the professional development organizations that I would suggest you get some of that training in front of. So I believe that the work that we do is in strengthening people, strengthening processes, strengthening organizations. And that really starts from the top down and from the inside out. So in the top down is the board being mission aligned, the board setting that tone and holding people accountable to that tone, starting with the CEO, and then the CEO and our executive director doing that with the management team, giving people the tools to do their job. Professional development is a big piece of that, and letting them understand what those metrics are around what that professional development should look like and what that end goal should be, whether it's a person in HR, whether it's a CPA, whether it's somebody in the accounting team, whether it's the social worker doing the work front line, whether it's a fundraiser. Make sure that they understand what those standards are, and invest in them, give them the tools to do their job, and then get out of their way, remove their obstacles.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate all the information, and we do have some questions. So I'm going to go ahead, and I think I'm supposed to open these up. I'm not sure. I forgot the process here, but we'll go ahead and see if we can get to these questions. And let's just see here. Just a couple things.
Oh, here's a question. I see one. Can I just read it out, Steve?
Oh, absolutely. Go right ahead.
It says, how do you recommend I use software to track non-numeric performance? Well, in fundraising specifically, we very frequently track the stages, for example, of the donor continuum. So how many visits, how many calls, how many emails, how many trips, that sort of, how many proposals, how many grants written, those types of things are written, overlaid around the donor continuum. So how many prospects do you have, in donor prospects do you have that are identified versus qualified versus being cultivated versus those with asks or proposals on the table versus those in the stewardship phase. So how are your fundraisers doing around those particular metrics? Now, that looks a little bit different in different areas of an organization. So if I'm a HR, a recruiting person for a nonprofit, I would suggest that you would do the same with the stages that are important there. If you're in the accounting team, how are folks doing hitting the benchmarks that are naturally occurring within a calendar? So for example, did we get our financial reports done in time for the board? Check. Did we hit that particular calendar goal? Did we get the 990 set? Did we do an audit? So you can put attributes into software to make sure that those benchmarks and goals are being met. And I know Steve would be more than happy to tell you exactly how you can do that at Criterion, which is just an incredible system to use.
Thank you, Beverly. So do we have other questions? Let me just pop this up here. I think before there's other questions, let me just flip this over. So you have Beverly's contact information as well as Carter Global, and you can go out and either research the organization or send Beverly an email, and certainly I'm sure she'll respond. Absolutely. And let you know how they might be able to assist you, not only in fundraising, but other aspects of your nonprofit.
Absolutely. We really specialize in fundraising. We do a lot in governance, just like you have corporate governance, we have nonprofit governance. We do a whole lot of that work and that strategic visioning that we talked about, a lot of work around the board. The one thing that we don't do is searches in the nonprofit space. However, we work with a whole lot of firms that do them and help them shape what those job descriptions and what those values metrics need to be.
Okay. Well, certainly if you think of something else, after we disconnect from this presentation, feel free to either, send me a note or send Beverly a note if you want some more information on either Criterion or on Carter Global. So Beverly, thanks again for your time.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
It's wonderful to exchange the information. And just wait just a second. We might have something else coming up, and just bear with me. So how has COVID impacted the way we're measuring performance? Is there anything?
That's a great question.
Yeah. There's more to it. Is there anything I should know for the rest of the year as we transition to a new way of work?
So one of the big things that we're seeing in nonprofits, a couple of things, particularly the way in which we engage donors, is the way in which nonprofit organizations are working with their donor population. So what we have found to be true is that relationship continues even if the vehicle or the venue of relationship changes. And so what that means is there's still a whole lot of people that don't want to visit in person. And that's okay. So if you're in a relationship with somebody, whether it's a friend or whether it's a colleague or whether it's a child or that sort of thing, you ask them what would be the best way to work with you, what would be the best way to engage with you. And people will tell you if you ask them a direct question. So rather than face-to-face visits in person at a home or in an office or in a coffee shop, we're in full belief now that you can do that in this venue. We're seeing a lot of donor visits face-to-face. We're seeing a lot of board meetings that are still being conducted virtually. We're also seeing a whole lot of hunger for people to be back in person in those things and engagement opportunities, but doing that in really safe ways and or blended environments. So if you can't be in person, can you do that in a blended way? And our folks running this call do that all day, every day, and do a great job of doing that. The other thing that we're seeing pretty serious changes in is events. So people, those big scale galas and events that nonprofits have done historically, we're not seeing a lot of events coming back in full scale. And part of that is people just got really used to being home and having their circles tighter. We also are finding that that mission alignment that we have always talked about is proving to be true. People aren't just going to an event to go to an event because their buddy invited them to go. If they're not, if it is not in a donor's top 1 or 2 philanthropic priorities, and they're not really mission aligned and have a significant heart for the mission, they're not going. So I think that is a real important piece and a change that we're seeing. So we've been preaching mission and vision and values alignment for years at Carter, and it's proven to be true. So if you're in a relationship with those folks that not just that you work with from a donor perspective, but those that you're in relationship with because of the work that you do, meet them where they are. And that includes your employees, making sure that you're setting up spaces that are safe and inclusive. So.
Excellent. We got one more question and then we'll let you go. How do entry-level or mid-career individuals influence leadership to take reviews or check-ins with their staff more seriously? Essentially, how do I influence them without holding that power, to easily do so? I've had a lot of leadership members go an entire year without ever meeting new hires at a relatively small organization because they didn't prioritize it.
I would suggest those mid-level managers need some teeth in their metrics. So do they have benchmarks that flag their manager if they don't meet with somebody within six weeks, for example, if they don't do a why were you hired and how can I best support you in your job conversation? Are there teeth in that? For example, am I going to get a negative performance review if I don't hit those benchmarks? Are there teeth around how many evaluations that you have completed? And are you compensated based on that? Do you get your evaluation? Do you get promoted? Do you get that merit-based increase? Yes or no? And it should be reflected in your evaluation. Manager's job is to manage, so it should be a core value in the feedback that is represented. And those should be meaningful engagements with not just performance metrics, but measurable outcomes.
And I think that goes back to your original conversation or comments around, the board has to be aligned with the executive director, who has to be aligned with middle management, who has to be aligned. And
Starts
without
with the
that,
board.
yeah, without
Starts
that,
with
it
the
just doesn't
board.
happen. Yep.
And I'm a huge, again, believer in boards having their own board evaluation and individual board member evaluations. Are they themselves signing up and understanding what they're signing up for as they take fiscal and legal responsibility for this nonprofit? And are they holding themselves accountable? Are they then turning around and doing the same thing for this CEO? And not from a punitive perspective, but to make sure that all the wheels are turning in the right direction so that you can have the impact on the world that you want to have and that the public has put their trust in.
Well, thank you. I'm going to go back one more slide here. I think I can. If I can, I will do it. But there we go. Just so you have your contact information up, and I'll leave it there for now until we sign off. But again, thank you, Beverly. We appreciate your time and also your information.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be with you. And thank you all for your questions today.